Welcome back, I'm Tedward, and thanks to Bond Group in Waltham, Massachusetts, we are driving a 1964 Porsche 356C Coupe. I have driven a couple Speedsters, 356As in the past, and had a lovely time piloting these vehicles. I think this really defines the pure spirit of fun motoring. And this is my first coupe and my first 356C. It's powered by a 1600cc flat 4 air cooler that makes about 95 horsepower in period, but I think it makes a little more today. There's probably been some work done to it. Obviously, it's been restored, but I don't have the dyno figures. All I know is that this light little car feels pretty quick under my right foot. Now, the earlier 50s Speedsters that I was driving were a little more rudimentary. You'd have to fill the fuel tank by opening the frunk. They had drum brakes, and by 1964, we had 4-wheel discs, which is a pretty big deal in terms of safety and being able to really put down some braking power more frequently. And we have an external fuel filler, so we can actually fill the fuel without opening the car up. But overall, I think the style of the coupe is just gorgeous, and when you put a roof on it, it certainly feels quite a bit more rigid. I definitely love the style of these little fins here, this beautiful paint match bumper, and how the wheels still tuck into the bodywork. I think that's really gorgeous. And in 1964, you might remember that a little car called the 911 came along. So this was actually being sold at the same time as the first year of the 911, but 356 sales still did just fine. This one also comes with a mirror. That is the kind of luxury that we like to see. Now, because I told you this car has been done over and restored a bit, my goodness, does this have a gorgeous interior. Check out this green. This is the stuff that Porsche dreams are made of. I am absolutely enamored by this. And we've got the cool Simpson belts here as well for a touch of safety. There are rear seats here, but you know, they're not the most functional. I mean, these are kinder seats in their truest form. I don't think you're gonna fit much more than a small child back there, but as bench space, that's great for storage. To get to the engine compartment, we pull right here. That pops up this little guy. And there we have it. I love these little engines. They sound fantastic. A lot of folks like to make fun of them and say, oh, it's just a little pushrod Volkswagen. And to be honest, it kind of is, but my goodness, the amount of power and just drivability that you get out of these little air coolers is phenomenal. They are a true joy to drive. And the rear end of this thing is all business. Look at the twin tailpipes coming out the rear. You've got a single reverse light in the middle. And this is probably, I mean, it's hard to say. This might be my favorite style of taillight, despite the Beehive one being actually the cooler variant. On the coupe, we get this curved glass, which just looks so fantastic. And I'll show you up front. There's not a whole lot of frunk space up here, but just enough to get the job done. You're probably gonna wanna use the deck behind the seats. So yeah, not a lot in the way of usable space here, but we do have a jack and a spare tire just in case things go south on whatever journey you're taking. So let's close it up, start it up, and go for a drive. To buckle up, we've got these fantastic belts. They hopefully will do the job for us today. Hopefully we won't need them, but we don't have a ton of space in the way of legroom. And yes, guys, I'm wearing shorts today. It is like 95 degrees. It's very hot. I'm sorry, you got to look at my legs today, but the steering wheel comes right down your legs, so you've got to be able to kind of make those pedal movements around the steering wheel, which is very similar and common in all of these 356s, unless you kind of adjust the seats or take out all the padding to try to get yourself way down on the ground. To start it up, we've got our transmission in neutral. We've got our key here. Add a little bit of throttle. And off she goes. No air conditioning for comfort today, but we do have the windows down and we can pop this out. I do wish we were driving a Speedster today, but you know, I still love this thing. I love that you can turn these interior lights on with just a flick. That's great. All right, so get our parking brake down. Our light goes off. Temperature's coming up. We've got fuel into first. And away we go. Now, typically, the older cars, they had a hand throttle, not a choke, but a hand throttle. I don't know where that is, if it is in this car. I have not found it, so it does seem to be idling a little bit high, but that's all right. We'll make the best of it. Off we go. Goodness, this is a blast to drive. Little bit of play in the steering, but not by much, just a touch. About that much, not a big deal. Very much what you'd expect. I love a thin wood grain wheel. Before I started driving these 356s, I kind of thought of them as like little clown cars. I remember it from Top Gun because that's what Charlie drove in Top Gun, but it was never something that necessarily appealed to me. Loads of ground clearance, which I love. Until I drove one. I drove a completely like unmolested original 56 Speedster, and I just couldn't believe that I had been missing out on this. Now, granted, that was like a $400,000 car, and you can get them for quite a bit cheaper, but they're still not cheap. You're still in that like $100,000 to $200,000 range, depending on, you know, what level of perfection you're looking for. It's such a mechanical, brutal sound on throttle. It kind of reminds me of how everyone thinks like old Hondas, you know, like a B-series Honda engine has a real mechanical sound to it. It's got that grunt. That's insane. I'm sorry that I'm comparing this to a B-series Honda, but it's got that vibe, you know, it's got that grunty sound where there's just no question that you're on the pedal, that you're going for it. Sometimes you really got to reach for that shifter. Third gear's far away. Not as bad as the older cars with those transmissions. I feel like they were set up slightly differently in the way they were placed, but I feel like I had to really reach for those sticks. This one I can still sit still and reach third. Nice to have confidence in the brakes, you know, because we've got these disc brakes. I know that I can give it a few repeated hits. With the drums, it felt like, wow, if I had to do any sustained braking, you're gonna have to start pumping them to bleed off a bit of heat. But the best part about this car is being able to tackle a few corners at pretty low speeds, because we're just on these little skinny tires. And that's where the joy of driving really comes into play, because you're not worried that, oh my goodness, I'm going 90 miles an hour in a 30. You can just kind of crank along at a reasonable clip and just have a ball. This is so visceral. I mean, there's not much more feeling you could get out of a vehicle than this. One of my favorite things is when I see these cars driving around Goodwood Festival of Speed in the vintage racing, and you just see them entering every corner with some slip angle. And you dream about that kind of sensation in driving. That's all you want to feel. That's what you want to be doing with your life. Some people dream of sitting on a beach and drinking a pina colada. I dream of backing one of these into a corner at Silverstone. I really do get a sense that this thing is fairly rigid and wants to do the job. I love the luxury of a self-canceling blinker as well. And when you do just want to kind of cruise around, I mean, it encourages you to be kind of a bad boy. But when you do just want to cruise, it does it so nicely. It's really lovely. I mean, here's the deal. Today is like one of those days where you look at this car in the garage and you say, that's not the one I'm taking. It's 95 degrees outside. There's no AC. It's air cooled. I don't even care. I'm sweating a lot. I feel like James May in that Aston Martin race car. I'm going to start peeling clothes off. You guys are lucky I'm wearing pants to begin with. But I still would rather be driving this than anything else. And over a bumpy road, it's so compliant. You don't have to be concerned about braking everything in this car. It's got the ground clearance. It's got plenty of sidewall. These things make great rally cars as well. If you're going to go do, like a fun European rally stage or something, time distance speed rally type thing, this is awesome. You're going to get all of the vibes of vintage excellence, but they're pretty dead reliable. I mean, there of course are things that can go wrong. You're dealing with old cars, and anytime you're dealing with an old car, there's always something that can go wrong, whether it's like, the fuel lines are gonna go, or the oil lines are gonna burst, or whatever. But like, if it's been thoroughly gone through, you can probably have some confidence that you're gonna make it. This transmission's fantastic because it's very obvious where your gates are. It's very forgiving for where the gears go and entering those gears at whatever RPM. You don't have to nail that downshift within a fraction of an RPM to make sure it goes in without a crunch. Like, it does the job. It's letting me get my rev matches in and nail those downshifts without being afraid. I hate a gearbox that makes me just feel like, oh man, if I don't nail it just right, then you get in your own head. I like to nudge it into second first before I go back into first, though. You know what? Let's go this way. I like to do that just because I don't think first gear is synchronized, and you want to make sure that you're not, doing any damage or hurting it along the way. I've never run a 356 on the freeway, on the highway. I feel pretty confident in this car. Let's see how she does. Cruise. It's a highway cruiser. What a happy car. It really does it all. It's a small sports car. It's got plenty of room. It's practical. It's fun. It's visceral. I don't know how you do much better than a 356, especially if you've got one with a hot rod engine. I'm not always driving the latest and greatest stuff. A lot of times, I pride myself on driving stuff that I've always wanted to drive. And, today, that's not always the newest stuff. Sometimes it's the older stuff. And the most exciting thing for me is to get into as old classic cars as I can to give this modern driving experience in 2022 or whatever year it is in the future, to show what it's really like to operate these vehicles. I don't think everybody has that perspective. You know, you might see them at a car show, you don't necessarily see them in motion. Sometimes you just see them in a museum. But it's really important to know that these are functional, driving, operating machines. So thank you guys so much for liking, commenting, and subscribing. I'm gonna go jump off an off-ramp, bring this back to Bond Group. Don't forget to respect the drive, and I'll see you in the next one. Oh, look at this visibility. Watch out for our trucks killing our classic 356. Always drive defensively, boys and girls. You never know who doesn't care about all the work you just put into your car.